Good morning and welcome to today's workshop, Roadmap to 2030 for New Drug Evaluation in Older Adults. I'm Daphne Gwynn from the Office of Clinical Pharmacology at FDA. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to provide a few logistical considerations. There will be time for questions after each presentation and during the panel session. Please provide questions by clicking the dialogue button in the lower right corner of the viewer screen. This workshop is being recorded and will be available after. Also, to get audience feedback, we will be having a live poll in each session. We will ask that you scan a QR code or visit menti.com to complete the poll. We will provide full instructions when the poll is available. Also, please note that the views presented in this workshop represent the personal opinions of the individual speakers and do not reflect the official positions of the United States Food and Drug Administration. To open today's workshop, I would like to introduce Dr. Xiaomei Wang, Deputy Director in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, Office of Translational Sciences, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Wang?
Good morning. Welcome to the FDA's workshop on older adults. The FDA's mission is to ensure the safety, efficacy, and security of human and veterinary medicines and devices, and to ensure the security of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, and products that emit radiation. FDA is a large organization with more than 18,000 employees. CDER has 5,600. At CDER, we focus on human drugs. Last year, we approved 53 novel drugs to treat a variety of medical conditions, to improve patients' quality of life, and in some cases, improve the survival opportunities for life-threatening illness. Last year, we approved 40% first-in-class drugs and 58% for rare diseases. For the last 4 years, we approved an average of 52 novel drugs every year. So in our review, it's a vigorous process to look at the balance of risk and benefit. We look at the application, new drug application, biologic license applications, or EUA, emergency use authorization. So during our review process, we consider how each patient's intrinsic factors, such as age, sex, race, organ functions, genetics, and extrinsic factors, such as concomitantly administered drugs, food, alcohol, smoking, can determine whether the drug or the dose is right for patients with these factors. So we routinely use modeling and simulation to look at whether the pharmacokinetics, PK, pharmacodynamics, PD, and effects, both efficacious and adverse effects, change with these factors. We also consider whether the PK-PD relationship changed with these factors. Today, we're focusing on older adults, as Americans are living longer and they are the largest consumer of medications and also consume the majority of the nation's drug supplies and under multiple medications. And yet they may be underrepresented in clinical trials. So the clinical trials conducted during drug development may not include the typical older adults with multiple comorbidities, and therefore the safety and efficacy may not be sufficient for this population during the approval. The COVID-19 pandemic has made us more acutely aware of this situation. So today's workshop, we have several goals. One, we would like to review current regulations and guidances for drug evaluation and labeling of medications. Two, we would like to review current data on inclusion of older adults in clinical trials in select key therapeutic areas. Three, we'd like to identify gaps in regulations and guidances and inclusion of older adults in data sets. And finally, four, we'd like to explore approaches to address these issues. I would like to acknowledge the organizing committee, Dr. Stephanie Quinn, Johnny Lau, Chi Liu, Patricia Slalom, Janet Schwartz, Bob Temple, and Insomnia. I would also like to thank in advance our speakers and panelists from academia, industry, patient organizations, other regulatory agencies, and importantly, the more than 1,400 registrants who for attending and contributing to the discussion. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Patricia Slalom as the moderator of the first session. Patricia is the Professor Emeritus at the School of Pharmacy at the Virginia Commonwealth University. Patty?
It is no surprise to this audience that the United States is aging. The United States Census Bureau projects that for the first time in U.S. history, the year 2034, the number of people who are 65 and older will outnumber children under the age of 18, and that by 2060, we project that as many as a quarter of the United States population will be 65 and older. Interestingly, the 85 and older age group is an area of particularly significant growth. And with increasing age comes physiologic changes that can alter the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of medications. We routinely adjust doses of medications based on kidney function, for example, in older persons. And we have been characterizing pharmacokinetic differences between younger and older individuals for years now. What we know less about is the relationships between concentrations and response or altered pharmacodynamics with aging. Aging impacts the nervous system, cardiovascular, musculoskeletal, immune, and other systems. And these changes have been less well studied. And we know that older adults generally have lower reserve in some of these systems, and making them more vulnerable to adverse outcomes such as falls from medications. So the older adult population is a heterogeneous group, and it's not strictly easy to define simply on chronologic age. Older persons are more likely to have chronic health conditions, with 80% of those 65 and older having at least one chronic health condition. But we also know that multimorbidity is more common with age, with 70% having 2 or more chronic health conditions in the 65 and older population. Along with chronic health conditions comes polypharmacy. From 1994 to 2014, the proportion of older adults taking 5 or more drugs, which is one definition of polypharmacy, has tripled from 14% to 42%. So not only has the population size grown, but the proportion taking multiple medications has increased. This is significant because of drug interactions that can become unpredictable when many drugs are mixed together. Frailty is another contributor to the heterogeneity in the older population. Frailty does increase with age. In the 65 to 69-year-old age group, about 11% classified as frail, between 85 and 89, as high as 40%. So not all older adults experience frailty, which is defined as physiologic decline, vulnerability to adverse outcomes, and symptoms like weakness, fatigue, and medical complexity. But for some individuals, frailty is certainly a factor in their response to medications. So how do we get medications in the right balance? We've been talking about this since the 1990s. Medications are an important healthcare technology in preventing illness and disability in the older population. But we also know that there's another side to the story, and adverse outcomes or even unpredictable effects are more common in people that are older. And so we need to get this balance right. Improving medication therapy for older persons is a complicated matter. The physiology changes, multimorbidity, polypharmacy, frailty, vulnerable functional and cognitive status. These are all things that we know are contributing to the variability among people in the older age population. But we also have other factors, how health information gets distributed and disseminated. To make some of these decisions in an informed manner about the use of drug therapy in an older person. So who are the stakeholders in improving medication therapy for older adults? Well, there are many, from organizations conducting research and training and funding and developing and discovering new drugs. We also know that the FDA plays a role. And what more can the FDA do to address this challenge? So in session 1 of our workshop, we're going to be focusing on defining the problems and gaps that are there for improving drug therapy for older adults in the regulatory perspective. We're going to look at the history and current guidances of older adults, for older adults in evaluating new drugs, look at the current enrollment of older adults in clinical trials of new drugs, and look at some international perspectives on the evaluation of medications, and hopefully have a productive discussion on defining the problems and gaps that the FDA could help to resolve. And in the afternoon, we'll turn our attention to solutions and the path forward in improving drug use and therapy for older persons in the regulatory environment. We look forward to a productive workshop.
Good morning. Our next speaker is Dr. Johnny Lau, Senior Clinical Pharmacologist in the FDA's Office of Clinical Pharmacology. Today, he will be presenting on the history of FDA guidance on drug evaluation in older patients.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to speak at this workshop. The entire presentation is about my own views and opinions and does not represent my employer's views and opinions. I'd like to share with you the background information first. I'll spend the bulk of time on the development of regulations, guidelines, and guidances in the US. We did some internal analyses on the enrollment of older adults in clinical trials to share with you. After the presentation, I do want you to remember a few points. Last but not least, acknowledgements. To save time for discussions, I will present the slides rather quickly, but I will spend more time on some slides. The following points are for setting the stage of the presentation. Persons 65 years of age and above currently account for about 15% of the US population. However, they consume an estimated 30 to 40% of all medications. Therefore, older adult patients are the main consumers of medications. This is the fundamental difference between patients at both ends of the age spectrum, namely geriatric patients and pediatric patients. The FDA communicates its current thinking on certain issues with stakeholders through guidance documents. Drug product label, also known as package insert, is an important tool to communicate critical information of the drug product to healthcare providers. This slide shows the milestones of regulatory development for evaluation of medications in older adults. The FDA required reporting of geriatric data in new drug application, NDA, since 1985, when the regulation for content and format of NDA was enacted. Notice, geriatrics is part of the specific subgroups, and this is the foundation of geriatrics in the regulation. The FDA published the guideline on format and content of clinical and statistical sections of the NDA in 1988 that requires reporting of age-related data. Age is part of the demographic characteristics. I'll come back to this point. The FDA published the first guideline on the study of new drugs in older adults. It emphasized drugs should be studied in all age groups, including the older adult population. It encouraged the inclusion of patients older than 75 years of age and those with concomitant illnesses in clinical trials. It also specifically recommended analysis of safety and effectiveness data by age. Then the regulatory bodies of the European Union, Japan, and United States jointly published in 1994 the ICH E7 guideline for studies on support of the older adult population. ICH stands for the International Conference on Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use. The ICH E7 guideline defined geriatric patients as patients at least 65 years of age. Interestingly, the ICH E7 guideline recommended for drugs used in diseases not unique to but present in the elderly, a minimum of 100 patients would be usually allowed detection of clinically important differences. I'll come back to this point. In 1997, the FDA established the geriatric use subsection as a part of the precautions section in the labeling for human prescription drugs to include more comprehensive information about the use of a drug or biological product in persons aged 65 years and above. This regulation is exciting because it is the first time that a regulation mentions geriatric on its own merit and not under the auspices of specific subgroup or demographic characteristics. In 1998, the FDA issued the demographic rule to define the NDA format and content for the representation of effectiveness and safety data for important demographic subgroups in NDAs. The demographic rule also requires sponsors to tabulate in the annual reports of their investigational new drug, IND applications, the number of subjects enrolled to date in clinical studies for drugs and biological products according to age, gender, and race. In 2001, the FDA published the guidance on the labeling of drug products for the older adults. I will come back to discuss the update for this guidance. This slide is a bird's eye view of the regulatory development for drug evaluation in older adults for the past 8 years. I will discuss each of the milestones in more depth. Of note, there were a lot of activities in the last 4 years to develop guidances related to older adults, and 2020 was a bumper crop year. ICH published E7 update in the question and answer format. The key points are a representative number of older patients should be included in the clinical trials. In the world of aging baby boomers, 100 patients are not likely to be sufficient for most indications. In the marketing application, data should be represented for 4 separate age groups: less than 65, 65 to 74, 75 to 84, and at least 85. The ICH E7 update applies to both drugs intended for the older adult patient population and for diseases present in but not unique to the older adult patient population. The emphasis of this update is to study patients who are 75 years of age and above. Avoid arbitrary upper age limits in the trial encourage the inclusion of patients with concomitant illnesses. The preference is for inclusion of older adults in the pivotal phase 3 clinical trials, not in separate trials. The pharmacokinetics for the entire spectrum of the older adult patient population should be evaluated to identify age-related differences that are not explained by other factors such as reduced renal function or weight differences. FDASIA stands for the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act. In 2012, Section 907 of FDASIA directed the FDA to develop a report on the inclusion of demographic subgroups in clinical trials and data analysis in applications for drugs, biologics, and devices within 1 year, and come up with an action plan for the following year. In August 2013, the FDA released a report to Congress describing the demographics and subset analysis of 72 applications approved in 2011 for drugs, biologics, and medical devices. In August 2014, the FDA published an action plan to Congress. It has 3 priorities to enhance the collection and availability of demographic subgroup data, namely, the quality of data for demographic subgroup analyses, participation of subgroup enrollment in clinical trials, transparency of the demographic subgroup data. Speaking of transparency of data, the FDA implemented the drug trials snapshots in 2015 to present the participation of patients in trials that supported the approval of the drug by age, sex, and race, and highlight whether there was any difference in benefits or side effects among these subgroups. By the way, it will be very helpful if the drug trial snapshots can show the data on all age groups rather than just less than 65 or at least 65 years, and to update the data when supplements of NDA and biologics license application, BLA, are approved. This is the guidance for the clinical pharmacology section of product labeling. It has a subsection for geriatric patients to describe results of pharmacokinetic studies and analyses for subjects at least 65 years when compared to younger adult subjects. This guidance recommends approaches that sponsors of clinical trials intended to support an NDA or a BLA can do to increase enrollment of underrepresented populations in their clinical trials. It discusses the following 3 approaches: inclusive trial practices, trial design, and methodological approaches such as early characterizing of drug metabolism and clearance, enrichment strategies. It also mentions the importance of clinical inclusion of older adult populations. This draft guidance emphasizes an adequate representation of older adults to better assess the benefit-risk profile of cancer drugs in this population, especially adults over age 75 years in cancer clinical trials. It also recommends early clinical development, clinical trial design, recruitment strategies targeted to older adults, gather additional clinical information, report discrete age subgroups, collect post-marketing data such as real-world data. This draft guidance is an update of the 2001 geriatric labeling guidance. It describes FDA's initiatives to increase the quantity and quality of information about the use of drugs in geriatric patients. It recommends the different age subgroups in drug product labels, such as 65 to 74, 75 to 84, and at least 85 years of age. We did a landscape analysis of our internal data, and the results are preliminary. We selected the therapeutic indications that are relevant to older adults. And then we identify new molecular entities that FDA approved between 2010 and 2019 for these indications. We gather the internal clinical trial data that supported the approval of these medications from NDAs or BLAs. We searched the prevalence data for these indications as comparators for the corresponding clinical trial data. The prevalence data are from community-dwelling older adults. Some prevalence data may precede the trials and limit the granularity of data as well as age cutoff. The following 6 slides are our preliminary data. This slide is for the non-small cell lung cancer indication. The horizontal axis is for the age groups, and the vertical axis is for the percentage of the population. The blue bar is for the clinical trial population, and the orange bar is for the US prevalence data. By the way, the following 5 slides will follow this convention. This graph shows a double whammy because the percentage of clinical trial population drops towards the older population, whereas the prevalence of non-small cell lung cancer increases towards older age population that way, this way, and this way. Anyhow, things are getting better, such as the Silver Project, which is a global geriatric oncology initiative to increase the evidence base for older adults. Also, we have the draft guidance on inclusion of older adults in cancer clinical trials that I have talked about. This slide is for the depression indication. There was adequate clinical trial population from 55 to 69 years of age. Beyond 70 years of age, there is a scarcity of data for the clinical trial population, but yet there is a definite prevalence in the population. This slide is for the heart failure indication. There was adequate clinical trial population from 40 to 79 years of age. Beyond 80 years of age, there is a scarcity of data for the clinical trial population, and yet there is a definite prevalence in the population. This slide is for the insomnia indication, namely trouble staying asleep. The graph shows an oversampling in the clinical trial population of the 60 to 79 years range, which may be due to safety reasons. However, scarcity of data of the clinical trial population showed up beyond age 80 years of age again. This slide is for the osteoporosis indication. There was abundant clinical trial population from 60 to 79 years of age range. Beyond 80 years of age, there's scarcity of data for the clinical trial population, and yet there's a definite prevalence in the population. This slide shows the stroke prevention indication associated with non-valvular atrial fibrillation, NVAF. I am going to keep you in suspense to make sure you come back after lunch and attend the sessions. Dr. Janice Schwartz will discuss the data of NVAF in the afternoon sessions. We do have some take-home messages. We do have guidances to help guide inclusion of participants in clinical trials, as well as labeling of drug products for older adults. Under representation of clinical trials participation for the age of 80 years and above is still a challenge in multiple therapeutic disciplines. Julie and Shengang did the preliminary landscape data collection and analysis. Chi, Patty, Janice, and I analyzed and interpreted the landscape data. Daphne, Chi, Patty, Janice, and I are the organizers of this workshop. Thank you for attending this session. I'd like to open the floor for discussion.
Thank you, Johnny, for an interesting presentation and a great summary of the FDA guidances relevant to drug evaluation in older adults. We'll start with a few questions. Does FDA have any current efforts that are underway to address clinical outcomes that should be collected in clinical trials? that might be particularly important to older persons, such as functional outcomes?
Thank you for asking the question. The FDA does have the clinical outcome assessment program, and a clinical outcome assessment is a measure that describes or reflects how a patient feels, functions, or survives. And then there are 4 kinds of COAs, clinical outcome assessments, patient-oriented outcome, observer reported outcome, clinician reported outcome, and performance outcome. Particularly for the performance outcome is relevant for the older adults because it contains the measurement for gait speed and also measures of memory. And to seek advice for the clinical outcome assessments, the FDA has 2 pathways to for stakeholders to access. It's the CEDAR clinical outcome assessment qualification program, or under an individual drug development program. And if you're interested in knowing more about the COA programs, I would urge you to do a search through your computer engine and just type in clinical outcomes FDA, and that will bring you to the FDA page on the clinical outcome assessment.
Thank you, Dr. Lau. And we have another question that has come in. Can you please share a little about why the 6 therapeutic areas were selected for the landscape analysis?
As I have indicated thank you for the question. As I have indicated in my presentation, that is the relevant or more relevant. I know that it's kind of subjective, but it's a group of experts, and we see that it's relevant for the older adults. For instance, like osteoporosis, like depression, and also like insomnia. These are very prominent type of issues that the older adults are living with.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And I guess also that there were new drugs in those areas in the past 10 years and data
Exactly.
to look at. Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Great. I'm looking to see if we have any additional questions. One other that I might ask you is about the challenges in attaining the prevalence data for such a landscape analysis.
Yes. Actually, it's quite challenging because because we have to compare that with the appropriate in terms of the time range and also the patients involved and accessibility of the data and all that is quite challenging. And then we actually have even one or 2 other indications that we would like to pursue, but then it's hard to find the prevalence data. So the 6 that I presented are the most that we feel very comfortable about the data, the quality of the prevalence data.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, seeing no additional questions, I will head us on to our next presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Lau.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is from Dr. Sharon Inouye. She's professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and holder of the Milton and Shirley F. Levy Family Chair and director of the Aging Brain Center at the Marcus Institute of Aging Research, Hebrew Senior Life. She will be presenting on the enrollment of older adults in COVID-19 trials. And I want you to note that Dr. Inouye will not be available to participate in the panel discussion later this morning, so please ask your questions of her at this time. Dr. Inouye.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, and the opinions are mine and do not reflect the positions of the FDA. So as we know, there is a long-standing history of lack of inclusion of older adults in clinical trials. There have been many recent calls and efforts for inclusion in clinical trials, including the NIH's policy for inclusion across the lifespan. The necessity for inclusion is obvious and imperative. We need inclusion to evaluate the efficacy of treatments and any needed dosing adjustments. It's imperative to determine side effects and safety in the target population. And most importantly, it's essential to assure equitable access and ultimately insurance coverage for the treatment in question. With the COVID-19 pandemic and its overriding predilection for serious disease and death in older adults as the key target population, I wanted to see if this would spur a change in inclusion of older adults in clinical trials. And so that background motivated this study that I want to present to you, published in JAMA Internal Medicine on September 28th, 2020, on the exclusion of older persons from vaccine and treatment trials for COVID-19. The goals of the study were to examine all clinical trials for COVID-19 that were indexed in clinicaltrials.gov between October 1st, 2019 and June 1st, 2020, which is the day we started the study. We reviewed every study description for inclusion and exclusion criteria for any specific age cutoffs, and we also looked for other exclusionary criteria that might preferentially exclude older adults, and I'll describe those further in just a minute. So first, we examined specific age cutoffs, and for this we reviewed all portions of the eligibility criteria section on clinicaltrials.gov. And these sections included the section on ages eligible for the study, the section on inclusion criteria, and the section on exclusion criteria. And we documented any age exclusions in the 55-year and older age categories. Next, we looked at indirect age-related exclusions, and for these, we reviewed all entries for indirect exclusions in these pre-specified categories. So we looked at broad, poorly justified exclusions, and so many trials had statements such as, quote, any condition the study investigator considered ineligible for clinical trials. So just a very broad, sweeping statement of that nature, which was extremely subjective and perhaps not well justified. We also looked at specific comorbidities where the severity or degree was not specified. So for instance, any hypertension, any diabetes, any anemia where the degree or the cup point for hematocrit, for instance, was not specified. We looked for non-specific concerns about compliance, and so many of the protocols specifically had that as an exclusion, concerns about compliance, without any further specification or details about what the specific concern was or how that was justified. There were also many trials that had non-specified exclusions for hearing or vision impairment. Of course, we did not count studies where specific retinal damage or retinal concerns, which could be an adverse effect of the treatment, were documented. Those were not counted here. These were more just specifically hearing or vision impairment, which may impair enrollment. And so that which was not justified or specified, we considered an indirect age-related exclusion. And finally, and importantly, many trials excluded because of a requirement for use of information technology. So for instance, requiring wireless internet, use of a smartphone, use of texting, for instance, to get text reminders, use of a webcam to participate in the study. This will automatically exclude many in the older population and also will exclude other diversity populations I mentioned. And so here's the flow very quickly of who we included in our study. We searched for all possible terms indicating COVID-19 from the time period of October 1st, 2019 to June 1st, 2020, and that yielded 1,873 studies. We had pre-specified exclusion criteria shown here, and our final sample included 847 trials that we reviewed in detail. I want to just quickly orient you to this table. Across the top, you see the specific age categories that were excluded from the particular study, and they were by 5-year age categories. So if a study said we excluded patients age 55 and older, they were included here. Age 60 and older, they were included here. They were only counted once for an age exclusionary category, and that's how they were categorized here. Now, down on the left, you see all the different treatment types of trials that we reviewed. So there were many targeted to COVID-19. And I want to call your eye now to the bottom, which are the important totals across all the trials. So here in this first row in the red box, 847 trials, you see that 195 of them, are 23%, included a specific age-related cutoff. Then we targeted in on phase 3 trials, of which there were 232, because phase 3 trials, as we know, are intended to enroll a broad target population where the treatment is intended to be used. And so here again, we see that 38 or 16% included a specific age cutoff. Now, I also want to call your eye to the 18 vaccine trials up here in the yellow box. And of these, you can see the specific exclusions for cutoffs on age categories. So 11 of these vaccine trials, or 61%, had a specific age-related exclusion. So now moving to indirect age-related exclusions by treatment types, orienting you to the slide. Across the top here, we have the specific indirect age-related exclusionary categories that I described earlier. Going down this left side are the specific types of treatment trials, and now I want to call your attention to the totals here at the bottom in the red box. So again, starting with all the trials, the 847, going across here are the numbers that have potentially indirect age-related exclusions overall. And here in this column, where we list any indirect age-related exclusion, but counting only one per study, we have 366, or 43%, that have any one of those types of potential exclusions. When we combine that with an age cutoff, because some studies had both age cutoffs and indirect age exclusions, we have 447, or 53%, of the trials. So now moving to phase 3 trials, the 232, again for indirect age-related exclusions, there were 100, or 43%, with potential indirect age-related exclusions, and then combining that with age cutoffs are 115, or 50%. Now going back to the vaccine trials, the 18 vaccine trials, 7 had a potential indirect age-related exclusion, or 39%. And so combining that with a specific age cutoff, we have 18, or 100%, of the vaccine trials at risk for excluding older adults. So our study concluded that there are major concerns that older adults are highly likely to be excluded from COVID-19 related treatment trials, both overall and for phase 3 trials. And they're particularly likely to be excluded from the planned vaccine trials, so this was of great concerns. The exclusions, as you saw, were for both age-related cutoffs and indirect exclusions, preferentially affecting older adults.
Now, we have to acknowledge that some exclusions for severe or uncontrolled comorbidities are needed. They are essential and appropriate to protect the health and safety of older adults. But I think caution must be taken to avoid unnecessary exclusions of older adults for reasons like expediency or just not thoughtfully thinking through that not all the exclusions are well justified. So for instance, hypertension is present in up to 80% of those that are 75 and older, usually well controlled. And so if you just list unspecified hypertension as an exclusion, you are automatically going to be excluding broad swaths of the older adult population without realizing it, perhaps. So we next wanted to find, did the predictions hold true? So after we had sounded the alarm, the concern, we wanted to examine whether older adults were enrolled successfully into the COVID-19 vaccine trials. And there was a large public outcry. There was encouragement by the FDA, we know, to include older adults. There was encouragement by many organizations and agencies and policy groups. And we wanted to see if there was success, particularly in the vaccine trials. And we know that this inclusion was essential to assess efficacy, the need for dose adjustment, the need for double dosing, the need for adjuvants, and to see if there was adequate immune response. And also critical to assess, obviously, the adverse effects, even in the short term for the target population. So we examined the first published studies of the COVID vaccines, of which there were 4, and we looked and dived deep on 3 different things. So how many older adults did they include? Age 65 plus, and specifically age 75 plus. Did they include older adults with comorbidities? So who would be representative of the general older population? And did they include any long-term care or nursing patients? And so starting with the AstraZeneca or Oxford trial published in The Lancet on December 8th, 2020, they successfully enrolled over 11,000 participants in their study, and they did include some older adults, about 974 in the 56 to 69, which as a geriatrician I would consider very young, and in the 70 plus group, about 444, or about 4% in their trial. They did include patients with comorbidities, but there were no comorbidities reported by age group. So it is not at all clear whether there were older adults included with comorbidities. And my fear is that only very healthy older adults were included. I do have a great deal of anecdotal evidence about this. I did have many, many older people contacting me saying, you know, I have hypertension, I'm only on one medication, and they excluded me from the study. Or I had breast cancer that I'm cured of for over 40 years, I'm on no medications, and I was not allowed to be enrolled. And so I have many, many stories like that. And so the fear is many of these may have been purely healthy older adults with no comorbidities and on no medications. And so that is of great concern that it may not be generalizable to the entire older population. And there were no nursing home patients included in this study. Moving on to the Pfizer, published in New England Journal on December 10th, over 40,000 were enrolled, and here efforts were made to include older adults. There were about over 8,000 enrolled in the 65 to 75-year-old age group, and over 1,500 in the 75 plus age group, about 4% of their population. They did make great efforts to include older adults with comorbidities such as stable hypertension, stable diabetes. And so in the 65 to 75-year-old group, about 5%, over 2,000, had one or more comorbidities. Similarly, in the 75 plus age group, about 2%, 725, had one plus comorbidity. There were no nursing home patients included. In the Moderna trial from New England Journal of December 30th, over 30,000 enrolled. In the 65 to 74, again, the young old, about 5,000 or over 5,000, 21% were enrolled. In the 75 plus, they really made efforts, about 1,300 enrolled, about 5%. But there were no comorbidities, unfortunately, reported by age group. So again, we're not clear whether there were older adults with comorbidities. They did have patients with comorbidities included. We just don't know the breakdown by age. There were no nursing home patients included. Finally, for the Sputnik 5 trial, just published on February 2nd in The Lancet, over 20,000 were enrolled, and the breakdown of age is a little different here. From 60 to 69, they had 1,774, about 8% of their population. In the 70 to 79-year-old group, they had 336, or about 2%. In the 80 plus, only a handful, about 34, were included, but kudos to them for trying. And they did include about 47% of those age 60 plus had at least one comorbidity. So that was very good. No nursing home patients were included. So across all of these vaccine trials, what can we conclude? Well, there were only a few thousand older adults, 70 plus included to date. Very few had comorbidities that we know of, none yet in the nursing home population at all. It's important to note that vaccine efficacy was still documented in the older populations included in these trials. So the vaccine was still highly effective in the older adults that were included. But I think the trial still raised concerns about the generalizability of the results to the entire older population in terms of efficacy and safety. And so to assure applicability and relevance of clinical trial results, we must find ways to include the older population in adequate representation with which they are affected by the target bees in question. We want to make sure, in other words, that the target population for the disease is included in the clinical trial. So how can we do that? We have to acknowledge there are barriers to the enrollment of older adults. There are realistic logistic constraints. There are concerns about safety and adverse effects, but I need to say we need to beware of paternalism and overprotective instincts because it can be done safely. And we have to not have these sweeping, broad exclusions. We have to be very thoughtful about the exclusions, and then we have to test the drugs for safety in that population. Expediency and speed is often an issue. We know Project Warp Speed was under incredible pressures to achieve their enrollment targets, but I think it still could have been done to enroll more older adults with adequate planning and consideration and expertise. There are financial considerations, and there are issues of hesitancy of the study population in some cases, but those, again, can be addressed. So what are some of the ways we can address clinical trial enrollment in older adults? Well, for issues of hearing and vision impairment, we could provide assistive devices. We can train our staff how to communicate with older adults. I do this for a living, and it is very doable to enroll older adults in large numbers into clinical trials. In terms of comorbidities, we should not exclude for stable or very mild comorbidities that are not needed for that trial. And we should involve experts, such as geriatricians, for decision-making about those comorbidities and for management of those comorbidities during the trial. In terms of mild cognitive impairment or memory issues, most people with mild degrees of memory impairments can still give informed consent. If there are any concerns, again, a geriatrician can help or geriatric experts can help with this type of judgment. And if capacity is limited, we can easily seek consent from the family. We do that all the time. In terms of mobility impairment, we could provide assistive devices. We can train our staff in working with patients with mobility impairments. We can make sure that we don't require or limit our trials because of need for facility with technology or internet. There's all kinds of other options for communication, and we can involve family members. In terms of concerns for compliance, we can provide scheduling, reminders, we can involve family members. And in terms of reluctance to enroll, there are many ways we can make enrollment as attractive and streamlined as possible and work around the limitations and constraints of older adults. I guarantee you, where there's a will, there's a way. We can make this happen. All that needs to happen is we need to acknowledge that it's a priority. We need to make it required, and then we will work out how to get it done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Inouye, for a really interesting presentation. And we have a number of questions, so we'll jump into those now. First off, in your analyses of the COVID studies that were posted on clinicaltrials.gov, can you indicate if any distinction was made between studies that were sponsored by pharma companies versus those sponsored by academia?
Oh, that's a very good question. Can you hear me okay, Patty?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Yes, it's a very good question. It's actually not something we analyzed in our trial. It's something, we'd like to go back and look at. So they were grouped together, unfortunately, in our analyses, but you can see the numbers are so huge. I think that both types of trials must have been involved. Thanks.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And so another question, how do you evaluate the risks of using vaccines or drugs in older adults when their subgroup analyses do not show a significant result for efficacy because the subpopulation is small and the data is sparse?
So repeat your question, Patty.
Yeah, so the question is about subgroup analyses. When the subgroup of older persons is so small, yeah, then how do you evaluate the risks and efficacy when the recruited subpopulation is so small and the data is sparse?
Yes.
And maybe that question for how do you evaluate that clinically?
Right. Well, that's kind of the whole point, right, of my work, is that the numbers are so small that they make these kind of analyses almost impossible to do. And the fact that we're not including the subgroups of most interest does make these types of subgroup analyses underpowered and very difficult. I guess if the question is, are we picking up any signal at all? If that's the question, I think at least, what you can say from the results in a general way is that the vaccines still had efficacy where they were analyzed according to age subgroups. I could not find that the adverse effects went through detailed analyses similarly by the subgroups. But, now the vaccines have been rolled out to millions and millions of people in long-term care facilities and nursing homes, and we're finding that it is relatively safe. So that's not an answer directly to that question, but it's a more general answer about what do we know about the safety of the vaccine so far. Yeah.
Sure, because having to provide consent for a family member who was going to receive the vaccine, knowing that we didn't really have data, and the continued isolation that older persons in nursing home experience because of our uncertainty about the effectiveness of the vaccines is, I mean, it's a huge issue, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And, you know, my patients and my family members ask me that as well. And my response is the risk of death from COVID far out, you know, the known risk, and that's very well documented, right? And by age group, we know anyone over 65 is at high risk, and the higher in age you go, the more at risk you are. And that balance that out with the risk of the vaccines being exceedingly low. And I don't know if there's been a documented death yet from a vaccine side effect. I know that there's some possible being looked at, but I don't think anything's been documented. And we've already had millions and millions and millions of people getting vaccinated. And so we know that the death rate from related to vaccine complications is exceedingly low. And so to me, when you just write out that equation, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Some additional questions. So if the person level data is available at the FDA and the EMA submissions for these vaccine trials, would it be worthwhile to collaborate with FDA and analyze the data to answer the question about morbidities in the older people who were enrolled? We've had several questions around that. It's not available in the published literature, but it is available. Would it be worthwhile to study that or evaluate that data?
I think it would be great to do. You know, full disclosure, this is not the area of my expertise. It's my area of clinical expertise, being a geriatrician. Mm-hmm. But if I can help the FDA, if you're interested, I'd be happy to help with that. But you guys are the experts, so.
I think we have time for one more question. And do you know of any real world or retrospective studies looking at vaccine efficacy or safety in nursing home residents? And is it of value to look at them as a separate group?
So do they mean specifically for COVID vaccine?
Yes.
Yeah, so there are several ongoing studies, trials now in the nursing home population specifically going on. At least 2 or 3 that I know of in the US. I know there's other large trials going on in Canada and probably other countries. And so we should have publications, I think, on that very soon. And these will be very well-controlled, well done, large scale studies.
Great. Thank you so much. We've run to the end of our question and answer time. We really appreciate your expertise today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a delight. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to our next presentation, which is by Francesca Tureta. She is currently a Principal Scientific Officer of the European Medicines Agency, EMA, based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And she will be presenting the EMA perspective on guidance on medicines for older people.
Good morning, and thanks to the organizers of the meeting for having invited the EMA to present our perspective on the issue of geriatric medicines. My name is Francesca Cerreta, and I have been coordinating the geriatric initiatives at the EMA since 2011. As the previous speakers have said, aging is prevalent worldwide, and in Europe probably more so than in the Americas. In 2019, more than 1/5 of the EU 27 population was aged over 65. And here you see the population pyramid. In 2080, the population will have shifted even more towards older age groups, with even a significant group of ultracentenarians. Now, in terms of development of medicines, when we set up the European medicines strategy for geriatric medicines, we also looked at age distributions of patients in clinical trials and in prescriptions. And here we can see on the right one of the groups that we looked at, where it is clear that the issues are more focused on the older old age groups. By older old meaning patients over the age of 75. To try to address the issue of representativeness of patients in clinical trials for authorizations of medicines, we set up in 2011 the European Geriatric Medicine Strategy. This had two bases. One is to look at the population that was enrolled in the trials so that we could have sufficient evidence to determine the benefit-risk ratio of medicines in that population. And the second was to transmit better, both to the prescriber and to the patient, the information that was available in the registration dossier, so that the prescription in these age groups could be better informed. Shortly afterwards, also the clinical trial regulations in 2014 expressed the wish of having a clinical trial population that represented the population to be treated. What does representative mean? From the EMA point of view, we consider that having a match in terms of percentages of patients is not really what is desirable. What it means is that we have instead enough data to have scientifically meaningful conclusions on whether the population is enrolled in the clinical trials is capable to give us an idea of whether the benefit risk that is shown in the clinical trial can be extrapolated to the population that will use the medicine. So scientifically meaningful is indeed a derivation of the recognition in ICH E7 question and answers that 100 patients over the age of 65 is indeed too low. But you cannot really put a firm number of patients that we would like to see enrolled in a trial, nor a percentage match enrollment in between the clinical trial and the real-world incidence is a requirement. Now, for pediatric patients, a degree of extrapolation is recognized as a possibility. However, older patients are rather more varied in their clinical presentation than children. So, a conclusion on what scientifically meaningful means would probably proceed in the following way. You would start to look at the PK of the medicine under investigation and to consider whether there is any reason to believe that there would be a need for dose adjustment. Usually, a PK study in older patients is feasible. You would also look at the pharmacodynamic and whether there are any specific aspects on the profile of the medicines that could impact the benefit-risk ratio. For example, anticholinergic effects could have a much higher importance in older people, the possible impact of the medicine on the risk of falls, or the possible interaction with comorbid conditions or frequently taken medicine in this age group. The toxicity and risk of the medicine and its therapeutic index may also justify going slowly with the enrollment of patients and therefore, for example, indicating for the need of a separate study rather than enrollment of the patients in the main pivotal trial. We would also want to look at the percentage of over 75 year of age patients enrolled in the trial, which is strongly encouraged again in the ICH7 question and answers, and possibly at a baseline information on the frailty or comorbidity index of the patients involved in the trial. I will be talking about all of these aspects in my following slides. As I was mentioning earlier, the second pillar of the geriatric medicine strategy is the fact that proper information to the prescriber and to the patient should be present in the approval documents. And in 2017, It was a study on the off-label use of medicinal products in the EU, identified the fact that elderly were forming a gray area in the labeling of products. Because in principle, the fact that medicinal products are authorized for adults and can be used in the elderly is not an off-label use. However, unless the SMPC specifically mentions upper age range exclusions, mentions the elderly in the special warnings, or mentions other restrictions. Therefore, we focused in the European Public Assessment Report, which is the document that outlines the reasons for the granting of a marketing authorization of a new medicines in the EU, on the information that was present, divided by the 3 age groups that are indicated by ICH7. So the younger old, which are the 65 to 74, and then 2 older old groups, 75 to 84 and 85 plus. So the information is looked in detail both for the efficacy and safety studies in terms of patient number and for the PK studies, to look at whether adequate data are available for the age range and whether frail patients, if we consider age 85 plus as a surrogate of frailty, are included. Then in the adverse event sections, we would look at the safety signals that may be particularly relevant for older people, including pooling some of these effects so that, for example, you see at the bottom the sum of postural hypotension, falls, blackouts, syncope, dizziness, ataxia, and fractures to show whether an increased risk of falls is present or whether anticholinergic effects of the medicine are apparent. The other point would be to compare this data with the epidemiology and the inclusion and exclusion criteria in the clinical trials and concomitant medications of the population enrolled in the trial. We then looked at the summaries of product characteristics of the products and in particular the section of indication, posology, contraindications, and warnings. On the left-hand side of the table, you can see what are the guideline recommendations for the summary of product characteristics. And on the right-hand side, you find the actual findings concerning the older population. The finding was that while the older population is a large user of medicines, the data and the prescriber guidance are usually missing for patients over 75 or with comorbidities and co-medications. Rather than firm recommendations, the tendency is to present the data and to leave the final decisions for the treatment of the patient to the physician, who is on one side better acquainted with its own patient, but on the other hand will need to have the information presented in the most complete and exhaustive way that is possible. One last point to note is that even in the absence of data or in the presence of very limited data, it is extremely rare to find that the indication for the products takes on board any age limits that were present, for example, in the inclusion criteria of the clinical trials. So generically, adults includes the elderly and the indication is not restricted. The last point I wanted to raise in terms of representativeness of the population is whether it is appropriate or not to look at age chronologically rather than at physical frailty elements. So on these studies by Prasad, published on JAMA on 2016, you could see that based on age, the enrollment of the patients in the clinical trials for a prostate cancer drug was deemed representative. However, in the trials, the ECOG status of these patients was rather showing a robust population, and the population median age was 65 years. From Medicare data, instead, the population was at least 5 years older, and comorbidity indexes were showing that generally the population enrolled being prescribed the drug was rather more frail than the population enrolled in the clinical trials. This leads us to the last point of the European medicine strategy regarding clinical issues for the older patients, which is the fact that we consider that chronological age was a suboptimal predictor of susceptibility to adverse outcomes. So we thought, are there any validated and simple tools that we could suggest to characterize the population at baseline in the to understand better the makeup of the population enrolled in clinical trials for registrations of medicines. Also, we looked at whether there was appropriate guidance on packaging and formulations for older people, because, for example, crushing of tablets for administration with enteral tubes, or child locks who were making it extremely difficult for older people to use certain medicines were appropriate for when a drug was particularly targeted to older people. This led the EMA to the drafting of two guidance documents. The first one is the points to consider on frailty, evaluation of instrument for baseline characterization of clinical trial populations. This is the proposal of the SPPB, the short physical performance battery, as the preferred tool if in a clinical trial the population frailty status needs to be characterized. I would like to note that this is purely for baseline characterization, so we're not advocating the scale to measure change, nor as a screening tool, nor as an outcome measure. We limited ourselves to the scope of looking at who is enrolled in the clinical trials. And this could be used to inform regulatory decisions in different ways. First of all, would we expect, if the population is very robust, the possibility of a difference in the benefit-risk balance once a drug is approved and is available to a real-world population? And the second is, if the population was extremely robust, and we have these doubts, do we need to ask for specific post-authorization studies to further elucidate the benefit risk? You can find the document in the link below. The second document is a reflection paper on the development of medicines for use in the older population. We want to make sure that if older people are expected to be a major user of a medicine, that the routes of administration, the dosage forms, the frequency, excipients, the container enclosure system, devices and technologies are all adapted by use to this population, and the considerations can be found again in the link below. To conclude, we recognize that the population enrolled in the clinical trials should be representative of the target population, and I have mentioned some of the activities that the EMA we have taken to try to explore that representativeness a bit more in detail. The second point is that we also recognize, though, that it is a difficult population to study, and therefore a balance between the feasibility of the study, the risk management, and the exposure of patients which may be more susceptible to new drugs, and the noise that this population brings forward in the trial needs to be struck. So this balance needs careful consideration at the stage of development of clinical trials and at the stage of assessment of the results. The assessment of baseline frailty would also allow a better characterization of the population enrolled in the studies, especially if there is a possibility of a different risk to benefit balance for this population. It is also helpful to try and explore real-world evidence tools as a source of further insights, particularly because the adverse events to medicines are underreported in these age groups. So to support evidence-based treatment choices, it's also important that on one side, the regulators should assess and inform appropriately, but on the other side, the physician and the applicant should support a knowledge gain both before authorization and in the post-authorization stage. And this can be done through supporting the enrollment of older patients in the trials, developing new research instruments and methodologies that can allow the capture of data in this population or the analysis of adverse events from real-world evidence, and supporting the reporting of adverse reactions, including the age of the patient, which is currently not a mandated field, so that information can be gathered in a more complete manner. This concludes my presentation. I hope that I have given you a good insight on the activities we are trying to undertake, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tereda, for a really interesting presentation. And let me start my video. Okay, we do have a couple of questions. And the first is there collaboration between the EMA and FDA on these issues of medication safety and effectiveness in older adults and evaluating new drugs?
Okay, so in the past, we have had several discussions, including, of course, cooperating with Dr. Temple, who chairs the next session on the ICH question and answers development. So, of course, there is a number of activities, either in specific therapeutic areas or generally in geriatrics. In the last few years, the EMA had the move to Amsterdam, so some of the geriatric activities were sort of subcontracted to the various therapeutic areas. So very recently, there hasn't been anything very specific, but I'm very happy to see this workshop, because I think that's a sort of relaunch of the interest and drive in this direction.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what has been the response by industry sponsors to the strategy that you outlined?
Well, we received several comments when we put out for comments the frailty document. In a sense, it is welcome, and even we have seen admittedly limited number of development where actually there was a focus in using this type of tools, because particularly in the cancer areas, certain medicines may prove better targeted to frailer patients. Let's say that, again, the two things coincided with this sort of cooling down of activities. We do actively, though, discourage and look for exclusion criteria. So I was very happy about the previous presentation. We're trying to look at hidden and age-mandated exclusion criteria when we advise on trial design. So we continue to give feedback when we advise on the design of the development trials. Thanks.
Yeah. So another question. We all seem to agree that patient enrollment in clinical trials should reflect the target population with the indication for drug approval. And can you share with us any actions that the EMA is taking to actually achieve that? So how are frailty assessments, for example, at baseline trial enrollment leading in any way to more representative patient enrollment in the drug trials?
Yeah, so let's say there are 2 points here. One is to advise during development. So if we see any exclusion criteria that jump to the eye for a population where we know a lot of older people will be taken, we ask the applicants to consider taking off those exclusion criteria, or otherwise to justify why there is a reason to have those in, because sometimes there may be justified reason. But in that case, there have been instances where we requested a separate trial, either before authorization or in the post-authorization measures, or analysis specifically broken down of adverse events reporting, for example, in certain age groups. So there is not a one-size-fits-all, but we try to adapt it.
Okay. And why was frailty the only characteristic that may be present in older adults on which the EMA chose to inform regulatory decisions versus other factors like multimorbidity, polypharmacy that we talked about earlier?
Yeah. We looked at multimorbidity. Initially, actually, we had started with a much broader scope. We were looking at multimorbidity, at cognitive impairment, and physical frailty. But in the end, we thought, it starts to become quite demanding and complex. And in a discussion with the geriatric expert group, which is our advisory group of geriatricians, they said, we'd rather see something that reflects physical frailty, which is for us the crux of the matter, than a number of other things that can be captured anyway in the trials under other types of either adverse event reportings or other baseline characteristics of the comorbidity indexes of the population. So in the end, we narrowed down the scope in the hope that the simple instrument of easy applicability was what would be picked up.
Okay, thank you. And another question.
Okay.
You're rolling in. How does the EMA enforce that clinical trials report appropriately based on these conditions of the older patient? So that, is it reporting just on age group or their chronologic age or some other factors?
So it's not really an enforcement. It's very much in parallel to the snapshots that the FDA does. So it's a way to publish the information on our website in a structured manner that is hopefully easy to find. Nothing is easy to find in regulatory documents, admittedly. However, at least it's always in the same place.
Nice. Okay. One last question. Do you think that special requirements will be put in place for approval of drugs for older adults, at least to require statements in the labeling or approval?
Again, it's a judgment call, and I would say that statements, we are seeing progress in the clarity and in the level of information on the statements that we're putting in, but we still have a way to go. I think that I would like to continue to see that focus, and that's why I welcome this workshop very much.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, we have one last question.
Okay.
Since physicians are unlikely to refer or may be reluctant to refer frail older adults for trial participation, and sponsors are then unlikely to enroll frail patients unless they're required to do so, how likely is the EMA to require additional studies if only more functional adults end up being enrolled in the drug evaluation studies?
Yeah. There were some initiatives that we looked at, including, it was mentioned in the previous talk, specific nursing home trials. So, again, it's balancing the risk. So it may be that you request to look at patients with a certain degree of frailty, or you want to see a nursing home study, or you want to see real world data collection. I think there's a huge potential in real world data that we should really consider seriously going forwards in terms of seeing both efficacy and safety outcomes.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next step of our workshop today, and we appreciate your presentation and answering questions. Our next step now involves audience participation. And that means all of you who have joined us today for this workshop. We're going to conduct a real-time audience survey to prioritize the important gaps in generating knowledge for drug use in older adults that we have been talking about this morning. We'd like to see how you prioritize some of the important gaps in generating knowledge for drug use in older adults. So we will ask you to please rank the gaps to be filled to improve drug evaluation in older adults, with the first meaning the thing that you think is most important, and fifth being the one that you think is least important of these options that are listed here. Inadequate PD data in older adults, unknown effect of conditions common in older adults, the absence of patient-centered endpoints important to older adults, insufficient enrollments of adults over age 75 or 80, and lack of accepted criteria for representative populations for clinical trial. And We also will have a second question where you can write in other gaps that you think need to be addressed. So we'll need to go back. You'll need to scan the QR code with your device or visit menti.com to complete the survey. And we'll display the results after a 5-minute polling period. I'll also mention that during this time, you may provide questions for our presenters and panelists as well, and we'll try to address some of those during the panel session. Okay, so we'll close the poll in about 1 minute. So please take a moment to share with us your thoughts about the important gaps to be filled to improve drug evaluation in older adults. Okay, I hope everyone has had a chance to register their vote, and we want to thank you for giving some thought to this and sharing what you think are the limitations. And I would encourage you, those of you who haven't ranked the gaps to be filled yet, to please do so. We have a minute or two on our agenda that we can still do this. So the more participation in this poll, the better, to help us get an idea of what the consensus is around this topic among the participants today in the workshop. So please submit your response to the poll. Again, the information for participating in the poll, visit www.menti.com and use the code 6566-7251 or scan the QR code. Okay, we're now able to add in those additional things that you feel like could be addressed, gaps that could be addressed that weren't among the 5 that we listed on the poll. This is an opportunity to share with us ideas beyond those major points that we talked about this morning. So thank you for that. Okay, please get your last answers in on the additional gaps that could be addressed. The poll will be closing shortly. Thank you. Okay, to get ready for our panel discussion, let's take a look at the response to the poll now. Our question 1. Okay, so it looks like the most significant gap identified here was insufficient enrollment of adults over age 75 or 80 in clinical trials, with a close second on the unknown effect of conditions common in older adults, like multimorbidity, polypharmacy, frailty, on PK/PD efficacy and safety. And I think those presentations this morning definitely made the case that we often have insufficient enrollment, and that we don't know enough about this heterogeneous group of people who are in the 75 or 80 years and older age group. Also, some lack of accepted criteria for what that representative population might look like was identified as well. And then finally, the absence of patient-centered endpoints that are important to older adults sometimes in clinical trials, things like functional and cognitive endpoints, as well as inadequate PD data in older adults may also be relevant, but maybe not as significant as the issues of overall enrollment of people within the age group. So this is really great. And I also saw for the second part of this poll, if we can go to the second part, that there are definitely other issues that can be addressed. Part of them is just the simple need for clear guidelines or even mandates that make this a higher priority for the drug development process, and opening up the upper age limits on clinical trials and ways to conduct those trials that are older adult friendly. All are important considerations. And maybe how we're using simulation and modeling in the planning and conduct of clinical trials. So these are all really good. And how about what role biomarkers play? Biomarkers of age maybe that are more representative than the chronologic age of a person's biology or physiology. So thank you for those. And with that, I'd like to begin our panel discussion, move towards our panel discussion where we can dig into these topics in more depth. So thank you for participating in the live poll. And our panel will include our presenters from this morning, Dr. Johnny Lau and Francesca Cereda. Also, we'll be joined by Dr. Carolyn Cho, the Quantitative Pharmacology and Pharmacometrics Therapeutic Area Lead for Immunology at Merck & Company, Dr. Jerry Gerwitz, who is the Executive Director of the Myers Primary Care Institute, a joint endeavor of the University of Massachusetts Medical School, Reliant Medical Group, and Fallon Health. He also serves as the Chief of the Division of Geriatric Medicine at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, where he is the Dr. John Myers Professor of Primary Care Medicine. We also have Dr. Sarah Hilmer, who is the Professor of Geriatric Pharmacology, the Clinical School Faculty of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney, and Head of Department of Clinical Pharmacology and Senior Staff Specialist in Aged Care at the Royal North Shore Hospital, New South Wales, Australia. We have Dr. Bindu Kanapura, the Clinical Team Lead for the Multiple Myeloma Team in the Division of Hematologic Malignancies 2 in the Office of Oncological Diseases at the FDA. Getting a little tongue-tied here with all these wonderful credentials. Dr. Phil Posner, he's a retired academic teacher and researcher and current patient with multiple sclerosis, atrial fibrillation, and celiac disease, and he currently serves as Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute Ambassador for patients with multiple chronic conditions. And we have Dr. Keith Talbot, who is currently Associate Professor of Medicine and Health Policy. Focus of her research is on viral respiratory illnesses in older adults, with a special interest in the prevention of illness through immunization. So our panel today, our panelists have been asked to address the question, what is the biggest unmet challenge or challenges for pre-marketing drug evaluation in older adults? Or what information do you really need to know before prescribing a new medication for older adults? And we will move through our our panelists to address this question briefly. And then if you have questions for the panel audience, you may begin to put those into the, enter those into the system. So we'll start with Dr. Carolyn Cho, who will share with us her thoughts about the gaps.
Thank you for the invitation for the workshop. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Yes. So I'll just start off the discussion with just 3 points that I wanted to make. I think this morning session is more focused on a statement of the gaps, and we'll talk about maybe some of the solutions in the afternoon session. I was interested to see that in the poll, one of the number one most frequent response about gaps from the audience's perception is age restrictions or enrollment of an older population. From an industry perspective, I would say we certainly need to work more on some of these disease indications that have not typically enrolled an older population. That's certainly borne out in the data that we've seen. But our primary concern really is that this question of comorbidity and polypharmacy. So we say that there's no upper age limit on enrollment in adult clinical trials, which is generally true. And we think that there's not a scarcity of patients in that older population, but the truth of the matter is that if it were just a matter of numbers, it appears that the people that we are enrolling who are older adults are healthy. And so how do we identify these smaller subpopulations of patients with comorbidities? What are the selection criteria? I saw biomarkers come up. And I think that if we had some better ways of selecting specific older populations with specific comorbidities, that would significantly aid in our evaluation of the older population. So that was point number one I wanted to make. We think that we have things like a PK assessment and those tools, at least in hand. And so I think we feel that the real gap here is our ability to select the target older population. The second question is the one of operational elements of clinical trials and how the clinical trials are designed. I won't talk so much about that, but you've heard a number of points come up today about how we can get older patients who are in care homes enrolled, or that there's a barrier to technologies, et cetera. So I think there's a significant discussion to be had on operational aspects to include these patients. But really the third point that I wanted to make, coming back to this question about comorbidities, is how to identify adults who do respond differently as a function of age. Is that a question of immunostatus? Is that something that we can address through experimental medicine studies, for example? Are we using the tools, clinical tools that we have, that we use more of in a discovery mode? Are we really using them to identify specific clinical populations for the objective of identifying specific treatment populations? So I think those were the main points that I wanted to make.
Great, thank you. And we'll move to Dr. Gurwitz. Do you have things that you'd like to add to the conversation around the gaps or what knowledge is needed?
Sure, and thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So I'll just expand a little bit on the points that Carolyn made and the presenters made this morning. I think a lot of the questions or issues in the poll intersect with one another, clearly. I often worry about representativeness of populations in pre-marketing studies. And I often sort of get stopped in my tracks at table 1. So I think anything we can do related to that would be beneficial. In regard to outcomes, the easiest things to measure are not always the things that our patients care about and outcomes that matter to our patients are critically important and are often ignored in clinical trials, particularly large clinical trials, and even pragmatic clinical trials. So, and then the final thing, and I think this expands on a point that Carolyn was making, is how do we make research age-friendly? How do we make it easier for older adults to participate in clinical trials? It is not easy, particularly hard for people with multiple chronic conditions and functional impairment to participate in trials. And what are the best strategies for doing that?
Great, thank you. Dr. Hilmer, would you like to add your thoughts on this question about the gaps in knowledge that we face?
Thank you very much. I think I would wholeheartedly agree with most of what I've heard, what I would call tonight and you would call today. The 4 key points that I...
For being here at a weird time.
Yes. 3 in the morning. The 4 key things that I really wanted to highlight were, firstly, I guess, the need to obtain and document data that was applicable to my frail older patients. So that's about both recruitment and about characterising the patients in terms of their frailty, their multimorbidity and their polypharmacy. The second key point, I think, is that in this population, there really are increased concerns about safety. And I think there's a critical requirement for direct pharmacovigilance data on multimorbid frail older people. And that could be nursing home studies, or it could be studies in the general older population where they're characterised by their frailty, which allows us to then generalise back to our patients. The third area that I think should be highlighted is really documenting drug interactions beyond drug pairs. We have such complex multiple drug-drug interactions, pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic, as well as drug-disease interactions. And I think there's a real need to enhance the drug interaction understanding and documentation in the PI. And the fourth point I wanted to make was about the opportunity to collect data about drug withdrawal at the end of clinical trials, which will give us some idea as to what happens when you stop a drug, whether you actually have to withdraw it gradually or to avoid the risk of withdrawal events, or whether you can stop it cold turkey. And that sort of information is available and could be required and would really help us as clinicians deciding when and how to deprescribe a drug.
Thank you, Dr. Hilmer. And Dr. Kanapura, would you like to add some additional thoughts from a regulatory perspective?
Yes, thank you very much for having me on this workshop today. I think I agree with most of the comments that have been made earlier. As we have, seen earlier that, the cancer, particularly the non-small cell lung cancer data that was shown, there is a significant underrepresentation in patients who are 75 years and older. And really, this is the patient population that will be the patient population that's receiving the drug in majority, because that's the patient population that has the cancer in question. So I think while it's really important to have an adequate representation of these patients who are 75 years and older, and even older adults 65 years and older, we've also heard from some of the survey results that clinicians have concerns about enrolling these older adults because they don't have adequate information whether the drug can be safe. So I think it's really essential that we have older adults who have comorbidities and organ dysfunction enrolled even in early phase clinical trials. And to do that safely, I think we need to have an evaluation of how this drug is metabolized and have an understanding of how the drug works. And also have adequate drug-drug interaction studies conducted perhaps a little bit earlier so that you are confident about the dose that these patients can receive and also the other drugs. Because again, as we have heard, older adults have a lot of polypharmacy. So there's concerns about using concomitant medications, and there's several exclusion criteria. And so we, even though we don't have a lot of upper age limit exclusions for the cancer clinical trials, we somehow are still passively excluding older adults because we have these exclusion criteria, because we don't understand how the drug is metabolized early on. There is a lot of work going on to expand or broaden eligibility criteria, but to do that and to enroll older patients safely, I think we need to understand the organ function, how the drug is metabolized, the drug-drug interactions, and perhaps do this earlier on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And Dr. Posner, would you share with us some of your thoughts from a patient's perspective on these gaps in knowledge that we've been talking about this morning?
Yes, it's very interesting. I had looked at the questions beforehand, and so far, between Dr. Inouye and the poll, everybody has hit it right on the head. And I feel secure that I agree with everything that they have said. I think we all know that the problem is getting sufficient data for comorbidities, polypharmacy, and geriatric physiology. But something that I think is really important is communication skills, because often we find that we're talking, but we're not listening, and we're not getting feedback. And so I think it's really critical for the patient that when information is produced, as in a package insert, that given to a patient, and then don't let the patient shake their head that they understand it. Ask them if they understand it and to explain it back to you. And so I think the same thing with gathering the data. If you're going to be getting data from patient-reported outcomes, you have to make sure the patient is speaking the same language as you are. If you're getting data from clinical records, you have to make sure those records are speaking the same language as you are, RWE versus data. Yeah. And so I think that's critical. But so far this morning has been wonderful. It's confirmed everything I thought I knew.
Nice. Okay.
For the information you've given out. And I think all the people I asked to attend this are going to be happy also.
Wonderful. And we really do appreciate your being here and sharing your perspective today with our group. And Dr. Talbot, do you have anything that you would like to add, especially around vaccine, your vaccine work related to these gaps?
Helps when I unmute. So I think the vaccine world for years and years and years has been very pediatric focused, which is entirely different than the geriatric population. I remember the first study we did, it was me and a bunch of pediatricians and adults over 70 years of age, and they had no idea the number of adverse events that would be reported, because that doesn't happen in kids. And so I think we're coming a long way. It used to be we did trials in Army recruits and then recommended vaccines in older adults, but now we're actually testing them in older adults, but we're still testing them in healthy, highly mobile patients who are not near the end of life, who are not on immune suppression. There's the long list that ends up excluding so many of our older adults. And so I'm left recommending vaccines, and I know work in healthy adults and don't know how well they work in not so healthy older adults. And so it's very challenging. So I would love to see that as a requirement for licensure going forward in the future, having some marker of how frail these folks were. It was really hard for COVID because one of the first uses of the COVID vaccine was our nursing home patients who we had absolutely no efficacy data in. We were just crossing our fingers. And I think the other thing, I years ago had done a very large clinical trial to compare two influenza vaccines, and it took 36,000 adults over 65 years of age over 2 years just to get a relative VE of 24%. And if I did that trial in the nursing home, the relative VE would probably be 5%, which means I would have to have a much larger group. So there's that balance of how do we define this so that we don't outprice the vaccine coming to market, but still get the data so we can actually talk about what are the appropriate ways to prevent disease in older folks. And it may not be vaccinating them, it may be vaccinating their loved ones, and there are people surrounding them, but we need that data to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And Dr. Lau, did you have anything that you would like to add on this just overall question for the panel about the gaps?
No, I voted on the over 75 or over 80 because I want to toot my own horns. I presented the landscape analyses, and so that is it. And then I really enjoy all the points. Thank you.
Okay. And Dr. Sereda?
Sorry, yes. For me, I would say that I'd love to see focus of the assessors and of those who design the trial, because sometimes we don't know what we already know. So I would like to see us thinking, who is going to take this medicine? Do I have enough data? What other co-medications are likely that these people will take? Because antacid, painkillers, they will all be there. Antidepressants will be very likely. So, I mean, all of this can put in perspective a lot of the information that we have in the dossiers, if we just keep that focus and we structure the assessment in a proper way. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And now we have some specific questions coming in for different panelists. And I'll start with you, Dr. Posner. From a patient perspective, do you find that there are gaps in the information needed when you have to make a decision about adding a new medication or thinking about taking a new medication? And is there enough information about endpoints that are particularly important to you?
That's a difficult question. All of us are different. We all have different comorbidities, polypharmacy, and most importantly, we have different quality of life goals. And the problem with the quality of life goals are they're changing depending upon where you are socioeconomically and family life. If you have a wedding coming up, it's more important to overcome a disability to get to that wedding. If you have someone who's graduating from school or getting an award, it becomes more important to do something. So it's often situational, depending upon quality of life and socioeconomic. Now, taking that out, and we want to think about the generics, well, there's the functional and cognitive endpoints, which typically include reduction in pain, increased mobility, as well as maintaining mental and sensory acuity. And those are the big ones that most of the people that we talk to. And so putting those together and taking a look at what the side effects are and what you're willing to give up in order to gain the level of functional and cognitive endpoints in order to do what you need to do is where the decision is made. And so I never recommend anything to anybody. I ask questions. When someone asks me, I ask them, well, what would you like to do today, next week, and for next month? I don't go past next month because nobody in our age group thinks past next month. And then ask them, well, what would prevent you from doing that? And then ask them, well, there are some things that can help you. Would you be willing to give up something? And what is that? And so it's more a question of asking questions and letting the patient decide. It's a team effort, what they're willing to take and what they're willing to use.
Yeah. So having information about the impacts on those sorts of things sounds like they would be really relevant to making those kinds of decisions for individual patients, right?
Exactly. And knowing what the physiology and the polypharmacy is critical. And it was already mentioned earlier, if your kidneys aren't working well, your pharmacokinetics are going to be different.
Yeah.
And so you may be having a real problem that isn't in the handout, the information sheet. So I think that's where the clinician comes in and has to understand where there may be changes in side effects that the patient should be made aware of. One of the classics, again, older people are constantly faced with the idea of hip surgery or knee surgery. And everybody talks about the surgery. The older patient thinks about, I may be nuts when I come out of anesthesia. They're not thinking about the side effect of the anesthetic, whereas the surgeon is only thinking about, well, you're going to be able to walk, your hip's going to be great, your knee's going to be great, you'll tap dance again. But to the older person, the cognitive endpoint is really critical. And they have read that, well, when an older person goes under general anesthesia, they may have some problems when they come out that may or may not be reversible.
Yeah. No, thank you. Those are great points. And we have a question now for Dr. Hilmer. Related, I think your comment about drug tapering and not having enough information about the impacts of deprescribing are important. So what kind of gaps do you think there are related to deprescribing? And also maybe some ideas about cumulative drug burden or anticholinergic burden?
Thank you very much, Hattie. Look, when it comes to deprescribing or stopping drugs when the current risk of harm outweighs the benefit, I think there are two big gaps which regulatory change could actually address. The first gap is around lack of good information around how to stop drugs. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that there is a great opportunity at the end of routine clinical trials just to document what happens to the people who stop the drug, which most people do, or a large proportion of people do at the end of a trial, to get some idea of how to stop the drug and any adverse withdrawal events. And that could be well documented and part of the regulatory package. The second major barrier to deprescribing we see in practice is that people just don't think about it. And I think there's an opportunity for regulators to have another subheading that says deprescribing or withdrawing or stopping, and actually describe the information that you get from that data at the end of the trial, sort of how to stop the drug. And just putting it out there as something that's part of the routine product information so that when people start a drug, they know it's possible you can stop, I think would be really helpful. So those are two things that I think regulators could do: collect data and document it under a separate PI, under a separate subheading on the PI. In terms of cumulative anticholinergic and sedative burden, I think that's a real problem for older people. There's really quite high quality evidence now from mouse through pharmacoepidemiology through interventional studies, which shows that the more drugs you're taking with anticholinergic or sedative effects and at higher doses, the more likely you are to be frail, become frail, fall over, have general functional impairment. And that seems very consistent. And I think what would be really useful to prescribers would be to have, again, another subheading somewhere in your product information that says whether this drug has anticholinergic effects or sedative effects very clearly, so that as a prescriber, when you go to add another drug, you can clearly see, oh, hang on, this one is anticholinergic, and when I look over here, that one is too. I can look in my mind and think, oh dear, I'm increasing this person's burden. And having that information loud and clear on the product information would be, I think, a really useful addition to prescribers for older adults.
Great, thank you. I think this one will maybe head to Dr. Gerwitz. This is about how we can include the residents of assisted living and nursing homes into the conversation and evaluation of new drugs. There's a lot of barriers or perceived barriers to doing research in these environments, and you know, what are the real issues here?
Yes, so thank you. I think we have to be careful about naively thinking it's easy to do large clinical trials in nursing homes and among nursing home residents or in other senior residence settings. And that's for a variety of reasons. The nursing home industry is intrinsically unstable. It's financially unstable, huge amount of staff turnover, sometimes exceeding 100% annually. Turnover administrators up to 40% annually. 10% of nursing homes across the US change ownership every year. So under those circumstances, to organize a large clinical trial in multiple states is extraordinarily difficult. Researchers external to the nursing home cannot directly approach residents. Written or authorization to approach them needs to happen from somebody within the facility. An additional challenge and barrier. Informed consent issues are remarkably challenging in cognitively impaired and sensory impaired individuals. And finally, the number of investigators who are comfortable working in these settings and have experience in doing clinical trials in these settings is very, very few. So we don't really have even a good workforce who can do this work in those settings. So there are major, major barriers that need to be overcome and will require a lot of infrastructure, regulatory changes, and financial investment, frankly.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question in from our audience that I'm not sure exactly who best to address it to, so I'm going to open it to all of you, which is part of the issue that older adults are unwilling to participate in research?
That is a problem. One of my jobs working with National MS Society is to work in our support groups and actually explain what a clinical trial is and what the risks, the benefits, and what they may get from it are. And the general naivete in the older population, particularly in a minority population, is large. And often for the investigator, and it was mentioned earlier in the setting up of the clinical trials, don't understand the cost to the participant. Simple things like daycare, time off, travel, how many blood samples, how many MRIs in the case of the, and I know I have been asked to look at some clinical trials that I laugh at, and I said, your enrollment's going to be about 3. Because they had people coming in for multiple MRIs, and there were no payments for participating. There was no payment for lunch. There was no payment for parking. There was no payment for travel. And they wondered why this was a grant that I was reviewing. After a year, they had 3 people actually enrolled in the study. And so that's the issue. There's naivety amongst the older population, but there's a little bit of naivete amongst the clinicians that are setting up the study. So I think, again, communication.
Great, thank you. A question maybe to direct to Dr. Cho about the industry's perspective on identifying these differences in safety and efficacy in the older population, and how might we best go about doing that?
That's the million-dollar question here. How do we identify in an older population particular types of patients that we're mostly concerned about? You heard from Dr. Inouye that, and I think from Dr. Serretta, that there has been some consideration of frail older adults. Then there's the question of older adults with cognitive impairment and older adults that are not mobile for other reasons than frailty. They can't drive anymore. They live in some sort of a communal setting that doesn't really allow them as much mobility as they've had in the past. So how do all of those contribute to a particular treatment of a particular disease? And we don't know. I would point to maybe Dr. Talbot's work in the vaccines field, where I believe we probably have the best, from an industry perspective, characterized older patient response in, for example, shingles or pneumonia vaccines. And we have explicitly studied older populations in clinical trials, large clinical trials, And so those patients we know are characterized by immunoaging, immunosenescence. Are there markers, standard markers that we could use now? Were we trying to identify, for example, a population like that? That's really research that's not unknown.
Great. We're getting close to the end of our panel time, and there have been a number of questions that have come in from our audience that we will take a look at during the lunch hour, because interestingly, everyone wants to focus on solutions. And we'll have a chance to talk a lot about those things, I think, this afternoon, about the directions that we might take to address the issues that have come up today. And so I appreciate the expertise and time of all of our panelists, especially those of you who have made it the middle of the night or some other inconvenient thing in order to participate with us. And at this time, we're going to take a break for our lunch, and we're going to return promptly at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time to start our exciting discussion, I hope, on the actual solutions to the many issues that have been raised this morning and the gaps. So thank you again to all of our participants and the audience that stuck with us during this conversation. See you back at 1:00.
Welcome back to Roadmap to 2030 for new drug evaluation in older adults. Before we begin our next session, I'd like to provide a couple reminders. There will be time for questions after each of the presentations and during the panel session. Please provide questions by clicking the dialogue button in the lower right corner of your viewer screen. Also, we'll have another live poll after the presentations in this session. We ask that you scan the QR code or visit menti.com to complete the poll. We will provide full instructions for that poll when it is available. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the second session, Dr. Robert Temple. Dr. Temple serves as CDER's Deputy Center Director for Clinical Science and Senior Advisor in the immediate office of the Office of New Drugs. Dr. Temple?
Welcome, everyone. Good to have you back for session 2. What we're going to try to do now is discuss strategies that we can currently use that are usable now to fill the gaps in knowledge regarding older adults during drug development. We know we can't do everything, but we can do some things. And in particular, we want to identify strategies that can fill the gap in PK/PD information for older adults. And as you know, and we'll hear more about later, the PK part is the easy part. Pharmacodynamic can be a little harder, but we can do some of those things as we get to understand mechanism better. And then what we're going to talk about in addition is future strategies that can fill the gap in knowledge regarding the actual benefits and risks that older adults experience during drug development and design the clinical trials that can help do that in the relevant therapeutic areas. And of course, we're learning more and more about what therapeutic areas are relevant. As you'll hear, we've known that CNS active drugs have special activity in older people for a long time, but we're learning more about cardiovascular drugs, and there will be other areas where we'll learn more. So sit tight and listen. Thank you. And perhaps what it could do to stimulate analysis of and inclusion of the elderly in trials. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about, of course, is what kind of information we need to the extent we understand this, and what can the FDA do. I'm going to talk about the things we can actually require, probably, under our laws and regulations, and then the kinds of things that we can urge or suggest, which we do in the form of guidance or specific case-by-case recommendations They don't have the force of law, but our recommendations can be taken pretty seriously. And this is law and regulations and guidance with respect to including the elderly in trials, which we know we have to do, and then doing analyses of the elderly subgroup results for assessment of safety, effectiveness, and very importantly, PK/PD information. Next slide, please. So what do we want? Well, one of the first things we want, and it's interesting because this has been strongly emphasized in guidance on studying the elderly since the 1980s, is PK information in the older population. You need to know what their blood levels are compared to other people and what drugs they're taking or conditions they have might alter that. PK information isn't very hard to get. It shouldn't take a very large population. And fortunately, we know what to measure. We didn't always, 20 years ago, we weren't sure about metabolites and things like that, but we do know that now. And it's easier to measure than PK/PD, than pharmacodynamic and effectiveness differences, which can be difficult. Sometimes they're not that hard, but sometimes they're very difficult. But it's never nearly as clear in those areas what it is we need, but we're learning. And PD and effectiveness safety information clearly require larger populations to identify differences between old and young. Next slide, please. Now, in addition to PK/PD information, we want enough information, and there's a lot of questions about how much that is. We need enough actual clinical exposure to look for age-related difference in both safety and effectiveness, including assessing the impact of other illnesses, because we know that older people are more likely to have multiple illnesses, and the effect of other drugs. And we also know that older people are more likely to be taking multiple drugs. And we particularly need more elderly exposure, and the elderly should not be excluded based on age or concomitant illness and treatment for drugs that have sedative properties, have effects on blood pressure, especially if it makes it fall, and are used to treat illnesses that are prominent in the elderly. We really need to have old people in those trials. Next slide, please. Now, first, let's consider actual regulations and potential requirements regarding both of these things. One, the need for inclusion, and two, the need for analyses. Now, it seems obvious, but it also should be recognized that a requirement for analyses, as I'll explain further, could have implications for inclusion and participation. You can't analyze something that isn't there. So we'll see. So what are the required analyses under current regulations? They're in 21 CFR 31450, D55, and D56. Next slide. This section of the regulations was actually added in 1998 with some congressional stimulation, and it might seem to be solely about data analysis. And indeed, the text says very clearly, the text of the rule, that, and it says it repeatedly, that it was not trying to change the amount of data needed. What it says is, the effectiveness data shall be presented by gender, age, and racial subgroups and shall identify any modification of dose or dose interval for specific subgroups. And then it also says the safety data shall be presented by gender, age, and racial subgroups and when appropriate other subpopulations such as people with renal failure or disease severity. That just refers to analysis, or so it would seem. Next slide. As I said, this looks like they're analytic requirements, but you know, if those analyses are important enough to be included in a regulation, and if the drug labeling covers use in both genders, all races, and the elderly, it seems quite within the scope of the rule to require enough patients in those groups to allow reasonable analysis. I wouldn't say we have specifically ever actually said that, but it is suggested by another part of the 1998 rules, which addressed the IND, and by the preamble to the rule. Next slide. So, as I said, the 1998 rule changed the IND regulations at 21 CFR 312.33 to require that annual reports tabulate patients who had entered trials by age, gender, and race. And the reason for this was to alert sponsors as early as possible to potential demographic deficiencies that could lead to avoidable deficiencies later in the NDA submission. That language, it seems to me, strongly implies that the lack of participation by subgroups could be an NDA deficiency, probably a safety deficiency. Interestingly enough, the regulations at 21 CFR 314.125, which refers to refusal to approve an application, gives as one reason for refusal, section B4, insufficient information about the drug to determine whether it is safe for use under the conditions prescribed, requested, or suggested in its proposed labeling. That plainly means that if the drug is intended for essentially everybody, you better have data showing that it's safe in that population. And the law in 505D similarly refers to adequate tests by all methods reasonably applicable to assess safety under the prescribed conditions. There's a strong implication there that if older people are included in the target population, you better have data sufficient to make sure the drug is safe in those people. Next slide. So the language strongly indicates that lack of important information in a subgroup with potentially distinct responses, you can always argue whether they do, but such a subgroup is clearly the elderly, could be a safety deficiency leading to refusal to approve a drug. Therefore, include older populations and don't exclude older populations because they have concomitant illness and concomitant therapy, because then you won't really know about how the drug is in the real elderly. Next slide. Now, in addition to the rules, which I've just described, that's the extent of them. They're not very extensive, but they can be read as making a difference. We've written guidance on inclusion of subpopulations in the NDA. In 1983, as a draft, and 1989, the final rule, FDA published the guideline for the study of drugs likely to be used in the elderly. It's interesting that the elderly at the time were described as people over 65, and that's because that stuff was all written by a 42-year-old, me. And only later in some subsequent guidances did we say that older might be 75. I think if we were writing it now, we'd go even further. There was, in addition to our internal guidance, there was a 1994 ICH elderly guideline and a 1993 map for use by our reviewers, stating that they should not start the review of an NDA unless demographic subset data analyses were done or readily available. That's pretty good. Guidance on exactly how to evaluate these subgroups was critical. And as I noted before, the regulations demanded analysis of these groups and strongly suggested they should be included, but they didn't exactly say what you should do with the data. Next slide. So the 1989 guidance went a little further in trying to say what to do. And one of the things it emphasized, as I said before, get PK early. The guidance focuses very strongly initially on a very critical point. Age-related differences can arise from either PK or PD differences. And the first thing to do, because it's easiest and fastest, and also we know what to look for, is to do the pharmacokinetics first. And we've known about, and it identifies several PK differences or metabolic differences that are age-related. We've known about these for many, many years. So far, I mean, at the time when we were writing this, PK differences between young and old were far more frequent than recognized PD differences. But we're learning, and we'll see whether that remains to be true. Also, pharmacokinetic differences can relate to age-associated conditions like renal impairment, heart failure, and multiple drug therapies, all of which can affect the pharmacokinetics of the drug. So it's a very important place to look. Next slide. The 1989 guidance gave a couple of special cases where pharmacodynamic differences might be present, emphasizing what we all recognize now as one of the most important areas, drugs with CNS effects, sedative hypnotics and others, because we know that the elderly may be more susceptible to some of those things. Dr. Slattum, who spoke earlier today, in a 2007 paper, reviewed the documented pharmacodynamic differences in older adults. Very important paper, which I had not seen before, and found that the most frequent differences were indeed responses to CNS active drugs. There were also some important differences in cardiovascular responses to cardiovascular drugs, beta blockers, things like that, but not too many others. But I believe as we continue to look, we'll find more, and the database is rapidly growing. Next slide. So it's very clear that drugs are likely to have multiple actions, even though we don't always recognize it. Patients in studies should reflect the ultimate user population. It's okay to exclude people who can't participate because they can't do the things that are required in the study or who might be at excessive risk, but phase 3 trials should not exclude based on age alone or based on concomitant illness or or of the treatments. And we will surely learn more about differential responses as we become better at including the older patients. And we now can move to an excellent series of speakers.